as I wrapped up my counseling for PTSD, my counselor gave me 2 final assignments. One I shared last week, which was to determine what God had revealed about himself through my trauma and through the subsequent healing. And the second was this: to build an altar. She talked about how in the Old Testament, we see people like Noah and Moses and Abraham and Jacob building these altars. The altars glorified God. The altars drew attention to what God had done in their lives to symbolize the works and the great things that he had done. But also the altars served as a symbol for anybody who came afterward to see what God had done, to stop and recognize and to remember. So let's talk a little bit about what altars were, what altars are, and what building altars might look like in our lives. So I don't know about you, but when I hear the word altar, what immediately comes to mind are the countless Old Testament sacrifices of animals, the burnt offerings upon altars. And I am always filled with gratitude that we no longer have to sacrifice that way. I know that I could not do that, and I do not want to do that. And the other thing that comes to mind actually is the phrase altar call, which, although it's a very modern term, is really the same type of concept. So in Romans 12:1, Paul tells Christians that we are to be a living sacrifice. So instead of sacrificing cute animals on stone altars, it's actually our worship, it's our actions, it's our faith that becomes the sacrifice upon the figurative altar of our daily lives. It's really the same concept. And an altar call is actually just calling people to come follow Jesus, calling people to make that commitment, to make that sacrifice, to stand up and say, yes, I'm ready to be a living sacrifice. I'm ready to let my worship, my praise, my actions, my faith be the offering that I present to God. But the type of altar my counselor was talking about was more of a memorial or a sign, an intentional act, something that could stand as a reminder of what God had already done in my life. And we see a lot of these in scripture. Some altars are built in the places where God had shown up, people had experienced him or received a promise from him, a word from him. And then other altars are actually built more of an idea of expectancy, wanting God to move. They build the altar in advance of receiving the promise, in advance of the experience, seeking out to him and wanting him to show up and meet with them there. So the first altar we see in scripture was actually all of these things. It was a place where God had already shown up, already done a great work. It was a place where God made a promise for the future. And it was also a place of offering, a sacrifice, in this case, an animal sacrifice, out of gratitude for what God had already done. So I shared in part 5 of this series that Noah was on the boat, on the ark, for well over a year. So for 40 days and 40 nights, there was flood. Then the flood waters filled the earth. And so Noah had to wait month after month after month for those flood waters to recede so that the boat could land on dry ground. So let's take a look at what happens next in Genesis 8. Then God said to Noah, "Leave the boat, all of you, you and your wife and your sons and their wives. Release all the animals, the birds, the livestock, and the small animals that scurry along the ground, so they can be fruitful and multiply throughout the earth." So Noah, his wife, and his sons and their wives left the boat, and all of the large and small animals and birds came out of the boat pair by pair. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and there he sacrificed as burnt offerings the animals and birds that had been approved for that purpose. And the Lord was pleased with the aroma of the sacrifice and said to himself, "I will never again curse the ground because of the human race, even though everything they think or imagine is bent toward evil from childhood. I will never again destroy all living things." So a couple things here. First, the Bible notes that Noah used animals that he already had on the ark for that sacrifice. And those animals and birds were actually brought for that purpose. So when we talk about the ark, we always say 2 by 2, right? Male and female 2 by 2, these animals all came and got on the ark. And that's true, they were 2 by 2. But actually, when you look at what God tells Noah to bring, he tells him to bring 7 pairs of animals that were good for food and for sacrifice, which just speaks to the beauty of God's intentionality, God's provision. He prepared in advance for Noah to have food while he was on that ark for well over a year. He also prepared in advance for Noah to have these animals in order to present this sacrifice. God knew that Noah would build this altar, and he already prepared him with the animals that he would use upon that altar. God had a plan for Noah's honor of him even before the storm began. And he has a plan for you and I. Even though sometimes it seems like our storms are lasting forever and the floodwaters are never going to recede, God's already provided. He already knows that at some point, we don't know how far into the future, but at some point, we're going to be able to stand up and say, yes, God brought me through that. I'm so thankful. I'm honoring him. I'm grateful for him. And as a commitment, I'm going to build an altar. As a commitment, I am going to be a living sacrifice for him because I've seen him show up in my life. And the second thing, At the altar, Noah recognized what God had already done in his life, but he also experienced the promise of what God would do. So if you've ever heard the hymn, "Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing," and wondered what the heck an Ebenezer is, that's what it is. It's the same type of memorial. So we see it actually in 1 Samuel chapter 7. Just as Samuel was sacrificing the burnt offering, the Philistines arrived to attack Israel. But the Lord spoke with a mighty voice of thunder from heaven that day, and the Philistines were thrown into such confusion that the Israelites defeated them. The men of Israel chased them from Mizpah to a place below Bethkar, slaughtering them all along the way. Samuel then took a large stone and placed it between the towns of Mizpah and Jeshanah. He named it Ebenezer, which means the stone of help. For he said, "Up to this point, the Lord has helped us." Samuel set up a large stone as a memorial, as an altar, as a reminder. It was called Ebenezer, which just meant the stone of help. It was there to signify that God had helped, that he had begun delivering them, that he was their helper, and that he was going to continue delivering them, continue helping them in the future. And the lyrics of the hymn actually echo the same idea. "Here I raise my Ebenezer, here by thy great help I've come, and I hope by thy good pleasure safely to arrive at home." It means recognizing what God has done and what he will do. It's both a sign of gratitude and a sign of faith. It's an expectation that what God has started, he will continue. How do we know that God's past deliverance guarantees future blessing? Well, he said so, actually. In Exodus 20, in the second part of verse 24, he says, "Build my altar wherever I cause my name to be remembered, and I will come to you and bless you." This was a promise that God made to his people. And in our lives, he has already shown up, revealed his goodness, but he's also made a promise that he will continue to meet with us and continue to bless us. Okay, so with all of this, what would an altar actually look like in our lives? Well, it would be something that would be a sign as a reminder of what God had already done. It would be a place of praise, a place to worship, a place to recognize what he's done, to thank him for it, to show our gratitude. It would also be a place of expectation, something that would give us hope that he would continue to show up in the future. And then lastly, it would be a sign and a symbol and a testament to those around us of what he's done, what he's capable of doing, what he's willing to do for us and for others. We can infer that Samuel naming the stone Ebenezer doesn't mean that he's like, "Hey, cool rock, I'm gonna call you Ebenezer," but actually that was written on the rock, that people that came along for, I don't know, decades, centuries, I don't know how long, what they wrote it in or how long lasting it was, but that people would see this on the rock and know that something had happened there, that God had shown up there in a big way and had helped his people right there in that exact very spot. Our experiences are not just for us. We aren't meant to live in isolation. We are meant for community. And the difficulties that we go through in our lives will build our faith and build our testimony. When God carries us through a trauma, it builds our faith, it builds our testimony. When we trust him for something that seems impossible and he shows up, it builds our faith, it builds our testimony. When we hear his voice and we're obedient, even when it's uncomfortable, and he still shows up anyway and he blesses us, it builds our faith, it builds our testimony. Every challenge, every hard season that we go through is an opportunity for us to trust God, an opportunity for our faith to grow as we watch him move. And it gives us opportunities to share our testimony with others. Your darkest hour could be your greatest testimony. And the altar is just a platform through which you do that. So what was my altar? For this particular experience, for the assignment that my counselor gave me, what did I build as my altar? Well, I'm slightly ashamed to admit it, but it took me 16 years to build it. And it's in fact this video series. I had initially intended to write a memoir, and I started it. I got through the introduction, which was really hard, and through most of the first chapter. But honestly, over the past 16 years, since 2009, since I went through all of this and began this, I have gone back to that memoir over and over and over again. And I literally couldn't get through the intro. I couldn't get through revising the first chapter. I couldn't get to the second chapter. It was so difficult for me to get through it and to come to terms with what I had been through. And what's crazy is that I feel like this healing journey that I've been on has been for the past 16 years. What's amazing about God is that every single time, every week, I have written what I was going to say in these videos and begun to record it. Every single week, without fail, God has shown me something new. He has opened my eyes to some aspect of what I went through and the purpose of it. And I love that. I love that he never has just one reason. He never has just one cause, just one benefit. When we go through something, as hard as it could be, as good as it is, whatever it is, it's not wasted. God will use every single aspect of that experience for his glory and for our collective good. And I love that he's done that. And so I think this 16-year altar that I've built, I think it was his timing. I kind of joked that I'm slightly ashamed about this, but really I'm thankful more than anything that this is what God has built with my life. I did actually build a couple small memorials early on. They're kind of hard to show you, but one of them is a tattoo I have on my arm that represents this idea of all or nothing. As I shared in the intro video, that was a challenge, a decision that God put on me of you have to decide, are you in or are you out with me? I am who I am. What will you be? And that was such an impactful crossroads decision for me and for my faith that several months after the event, I ended up getting this tattoo. And then several years later, I got a raven tattoo. As I shared in part 3, the story of Elijah and how God provided with food from ravens and how that looked in my life, where there were times where I didn't know how I was going to make it through the day. And God gave me the strength just to take one step and then one step. And that's what that reminder is. And then I also have one that says all things. I don't know if you can see that, but that's right there. And that's from Romans 8:28. And as I shared in part 1, that's this faith that I have to have that everything works for the good of God's glory and the good of his collective people's good. That's all of us. That's you and me. And what's wonderful about the tattoos is I've actually had people come up to me in stores randomly on the street and ask about tattoos. And I've gotten, especially with the raven one, I've gotten to share testimonies of God's daily provision in my life with total strangers. And I've even heard them share back to me in that moment, that's crazy. I'm going through this very similar experience, and it's building their faith. So you don't have to get a tattoo. If you're thinking that I'm saying you should all go get tattoos as altars and memorials, that is not at all what I'm saying. There's many different things that an altar might look like in your life. These are just some of the things that I like because they're there. They're constant 24/7 reminders of what God's done, and they're obvious symbols to other people of what he's done in my life. So unrelated to this particular story, God gives me a word or a phrase annually. I know that he does this for a lot of people, but he gives me a word that's a promise for that next year. It's been kind of insane to see the way some of them have played out completely unexpected to what my idea of that word was. But initially I started getting them as necklaces that have a word or phrase printed on them, and I would wear that as a necklace throughout the year, and then I would switch it out for the next year. But I wanted to keep them, and so I put them all in a keychain, and here I've got 6 years worth of promises that I like to flip through and think through, what did he actually do that year, and what am I still believing him for? Because there are a lot of these things that he has shown up for, but I believe that he has even more for me in these specific areas. I've seen people make altars that were posters, that were signs. I've seen even something as simple as a Post-it note, like on your bathroom mirror or your bedroom mirror, reminding you of a word or a promise that God's given you, something momentous that he's done. We actually used a rock at one point, put a rock on our mantle as a reminder of how God brought the Israelites through the Jordan River at the beginning of Joshua and what he was doing for me at that time and what he was going to continue to do. So this is it. This is how I end the series, by giving you the same challenge my counselor gave me. Build an altar. Build an altar to what God has revealed in your lives. Build an altar to what he has carried you through. Maybe it was a very specific traumatic event. Maybe it was a hard season. Maybe he's just shown up in a very similar way and you've seen a pattern of him working in this specific way in your life. Build an altar to that. Build an altar wherever God has caused his name to be remembered by you, and build it with the expectation that he will continue to meet with you. He will continue to bless you. He will continue to move in your life. Build an altar that will be a testimony to others, that others will see it and ask, what is this about? And it will open an opportunity for you to be able to minister to them, for you to be able to share what he's done in your lives. And finally, I just want to thank you. If you've watched this video to the end, if you've gotten this far, if you've gone along on this healing journey with me, thank you. Thank you to those of you who have commented or DM'd me, who have emailed, who have texted, who have shared what it is that God's revealed to you through these videos, ways that he stirred your heart, ways that he's encouraged you. Each one is this beautiful reminder that God's not done with my story yet, that even the darkest, most traumatic experience of my life is something that is constantly being redeemed, and that he has and will continue to use this for his glory and our good collectively over and over and over again. So thank you.